Good evening, folks, or morning, actually. It's 3 o'clock a.m. This is Aaron DeBruin, Vinyl Freak 89, here once again to give you an update on the March 25th situation. First off, let's get an administrative, well, not really administrative, but let's get one thing out of the way, and that's our clipper from March 21st through 23rd. Definitely a bigger deal the further west you go. It is going to weaken, it looks like, when it comes over the mountains. And I like pretty much a consensus track between the Euro and the Canadian. I think the GFS is out to lunch as it is with most things. With this clipper, I think we see the low actually take a track something like this in here. Down through southern Ohio, West Virginia, right across DC, and then out to sea. And it's pretty much going to be a very weak low once it gets into at least this region here. So I'll take that off the map. You can see what I'm highlighting, 1 to 2 inches going across from southern Jersey, very northern Maryland, traced to 2 inches actually, very northern Maryland, southern Ohio, Indiana, 2 to 4 across most of Pennsylvania, southwestern interior of New York, southern lower peninsula, and 4 to 8 across northern Ohio and northern Indiana as well. And that Chicago, it's not on this map, but Chicago would be included in that. Alright, cool, good. So now that that's out of the way, that's the first guess. That will be updated tomorrow, probably midday for a first call. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a chance to get to the computer by then, but I will do my best. And then final call will come out either tomorrow evening or early Friday morning. So what we're going to do today is, in another thread on another board, DT had mentioned how this would look similar possibly to January 1996. And so we're going to go through the 1996 analog. And we're going to highlight some key features of how it's similar and how it's different. And to show you what's going on and may have implications for the eventual evolution of this system. So we're going to do that, and we're going to sort of compare that to the depiction, the latest depiction on the 0Z Euro. So let's go ahead and get right down to it. Bring up probably one of your favorite maps. This is January 1996 on the 5th. X0Z. Alright, couple things to note in here. First off, we have sitting up here, and that's a terrible color. Sorry about that. Let's try that. It's a little better. Here comes disturbance diving down, very much like we have our disturbance diving down. Here's a low, strong low in southeast Canada. There's a block up to the north. And with this strong, by the way, we're going to focus always on the top two panels, not on the bottom two, but you will have them for reference in the image as well. One thing that I'd like to note is with 1996, the whole thing was shifted probably 500 miles to the west, the whole complex, both the system diving down and the low in southeast Canada. So when we moved on to 12Z that day, we started, and first off in the 0Z, here's low pressure forming in Texas. And here's, there might be a hint of a little clipper system. Here's sort of an initial shortwave going by, much like what we saw during what we're seeing during our system now. So we move on to 12Z, and we can see here it comes diving down. There's more energy left behind, and this is a key difference: the fact that there's more energy clustered behind diving into the system. But here's the main shortwave sitting in here. Here's the low in southeast Canada, and here's the clipper sort of type feature flattening out and starting to get out of the way. Big 1040 high sitting in here. Again, we see a similar thing, but it's placed further to the west and a little bit further to the north for our current setup. Here comes the southern branch shortwave, much like we're seeing. So this is a Miller A feature, as is the one that we're seeing this weekend, at least right now, although there's some concerns about it being a Miller B or maybe a Miller AB type hybrid, and we'll get to that in a minute. But okay, so these are some key differences. Now, this feature sitting in here, we could very easily see that happen. What has to happen? We see the first shortwave that's coming in either slow down, and that will allow the second shortwave that is the GFS sort of showed yesterday acting as a kicker to speed up and be this other piece of energy on the backside of the system that could dive into it. It's possible. The other thing that could create that is if the entire thing comes in further west, and we really won't know that until the shortwave gets onshore and we can start to get some better sampling data, because there is a strong ridge sitting across the southwestern U.S., which very well could allow there to be stronger vorticities and lower heights across the Intermountain West. So here we can see the lows forming. Again, this setup with the low very similar to what we're seeing on the Euro. So we move on now to January 6th at 0Z. Just going to give the maps a second to load in here. Yeah. So, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the full map up for every frame, but it should be loaded. Here we go. Okay. You can see very similar. Here's the first shortwave getting out of the way. Here's the second thing diving down. It really doesn't look too strong, but here's the piece that's coming from around the back. Nice high building in. And here you can see that very similar setup with a weak wave of low pressure. This time you had all sorts of overrunning precip breaking out in here, and it's just a mess, getting ready to set up for a pretty big storm. Here's the low in southeast Canada getting ready to exit, much like we're seeing with our current feature, flipping the NAO, and it's basically what we see. Here's the ridge along the west coast. Again, shift everything about 500 miles further east with our current setup. Now, I do want to point out at this point that that shift to the east may not necessarily be a bad thing. Because of the time of the season. Keep in mind, this is almost 2.5 months later, and I'll explain that a little bit when we get to the Euro. So moving on to 12Z, we can see here we go. Here we get the strong shortwave in here. Here's the quote-unquote kicker, or the next piece of energy that's going to phase in behind. Here's the low starting to develop along the coast. Precipice breaking out all through in this region in here. And also a little bit further back, and we're getting ready to set up for the blizzard of 96. Great. So let's move on to January 7th, when things really start to get cranking. I love really the way that this thing evolves, but so what happens is, okay, here comes the shortwave in here, here's the piece coming from behind, and this piece is really important because what it allows to happen is rather than this thing just getting pulled out in front, it forces it to dig, and you get a nice big cutoff low sitting down in Atlanta that basically moves very slowly northeast. So what's happening at this time is, if we go over to the surface map, I'm going to sort of get rid of that. So here we've got our initial disturbance sitting in here. So what? We get one low that's trying to go up to the west, but here all this energy is diving in on the back side. So we have a low pressure forming in the Gulf of Mexico. Beautiful cold air damming setup. Here's the high in here, secondary high over Quebec. And you can see the cold air damming. You can see it even in the pressure contours on the model. And so at this time you get all overrunning precip all breaking out in here, and it's still a mess. a lot going on. And this is what happens. The entire thing closes off. Now this sort of looks like a Miller B. It's not. It's definitively a Miller A because the emphasis of energy is coming in the southern branch. Here comes the low forming along the coast. Here comes the high in that classic banana shape sort of look that we look for the big storms. And then this thing just pretty much from this point goes to town. Once we get to January 8th at 0Z, which is sort of when the brunt of the blizzard is, for most people at least. Here we can see this extremely strong closed low sitting over eastern Kentucky. Here's the low right along the coast.